It all began with a knock, sharp, deliberate, slicing through the still summer air like a blade. Michael, a man of quiet habits who had spent over 3 decades in his modest Wiltshire home, never thought he'd experience such an abrupt disruption in his peaceful world. As he walked towards the door, his thoughts raced. Could it be a neighbor? Package delivery? But the moment he swung it open, revealing 2 officers standing on his doorstep, their expressions unreadable, the ground beneath him seemed to shift. "We're here regarding a disturbance," one of them stated, clipboard in hand. Michael's stomach tightened. A disturbance. Him. The very idea seemed absurd. His days were simple, filled with the comforting routine of morning coffee by the pond, tending to his beloved garden, and embracing the serenity of his small, quiet neighborhood. The notion that he, of all people, could be the cause of any kind of trouble was unthinkable. Yet, he steadied himself, masked his confusion, and gestured for them to come inside. Before he could make sense of the situation, Annette, the new neighbor, high-strung and brimming with an air of superiority, marched in, her polished facade barely concealing the venom beneath. She wasted no time. "He doesn't belong here," she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "He's ruining our village." Michael stood motionless, the weight of her accusation crashing over him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just some trivial misunderstanding. It was personal, poisoned by a prejudice so sharp it cut deeper than he could have ever imagined. For a man who had built a life of quiet dignity, to be labeled an outsider in his own home was beyond comprehension. What could possibly drive someone to such extremes? This story of betrayal, defiance, and one man's fight to reclaim his reputation unfolds right here on True Stories, where the truth reveals itself in the most unexpected ways. Stay with us to see how Michael, a man who never sought conflict, turns the tables in a battle he never asked for, but refuses to lose. Michael's morning ritual was his sanctuary. The first golden rays of sunlight painted his garden in soft amber hues as he brewed his coffee, breathing in the rich aroma while watering the vibrant blooms he had nurtured for years. It was in these moments of solitude that he reminded himself why he had chosen this quiet Wiltshire corner decades ago. This was peace. This was home. But that peace shattered the day Annette moved in next door. At first, he thought little of her cold demeanor. Everyone adjusts differently, he told himself. Maybe she wasn't used to the friendliness of a small-town community. But the way she barely acknowledged him, her pointed stares, her clipped, dismissive remarks, they gnawed at him. "She's just private," he reassured himself. Time would smooth the rough edges. Wouldn't it? But days turned into weeks, and Annette's behavior took on a sharper, more menacing tone. She rarely emerged, her curtains drawn tight, as though she wished to shut out the very existence of the world around her. When she did step outside, it was only to cast disapproving glances at Michael's humble home, her expression etched with something he couldn't quite name. Then, one sweltering afternoon, Michael sat by his small pond, soaking in the warmth, when he noticed Annette standing stiffly on her porch, phone in hand, snapping pictures. He lifted a hand in a friendly wave, hoping to ease whatever invisible tension lingered between them. Her response: sneer. A deliberate turn of her back. A knot of unease settled deep in his chest. Something wasn't right. And then escalation. The knock on his door that day was loud, firm. 2 officers stood before him, their postures rigid, their expressions unreadable. "We've had complaints about noise disturbances coming from this residence." Michael blinked. Noise. The word felt foreign on his tongue. His life was defined by quiet moments, peaceful rhythm. He invited them inside, leading them through his home, showing them the untouched serenity of his garden, the stillness of the rooms. When the officers left, the reality of what had happened crashed down on him. She had done this, and then there she was, standing at the edge of her property, arms crossed, her voice loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "He doesn't belong here," she declared, each word a dagger. "He's a drifter pretending to fit in. This village deserves better." Michael's heart pounded. It wasn't just an insult, It was an attempt to erase his very existence. A man who had poured decades of love and care into this community was now being painted as an intruder. His fists clenched at his sides, anger warring with the part of him that refused to stoop to her level. "I've lived here for 30 years, he said, voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "This is my home." But Annette wasn't done. Over the following weeks, the attacks became relentless. Whispers followed him in the village. Store owners who once greeted him warmly now avoided his gaze. Posters appeared, grainy photos of him in his garden, plastered with damning words. "Does this man make you feel safe?" Michael barely slept. His garden, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage for Annette's vendetta. But in his darkest moments, his resolve hardened. "She won't win," he whispered to himself, clutching his tea with trembling hands. "I won't let her take this from me." Determined to fight back, he sought allies. Mrs. Bennet, his elderly neighbor, was the first to stand by him. "That woman's delusional," she scoffed. "We all know who you are, Michael. She's the outsider." Mr. Singh, whose security camera overlooked Michael's property, had even better news. The footage showed Annette trespassing, peering into his windows, even damaging his garden to stage her accusations. Armed with evidence, and bolstered by the few who still believed in him, Michael took legal action. When the court summons landed on Annette's doorstep, her smugness faltered. In the courtroom, the truth came crashing down. Footage showed her crouched by his fence, phone in hand, trespassing, tampering, fabricating. Witnesses exposed her as a woman obsessed with tearing down a neighbor who had done nothing to her. "This is harassment," the magistrate declared. "And it stops now." Annette was slapped with an antisocial behavior order, legally forbidden from approaching Michael or spreading further lies. She was also ordered to pay damages, a small but deeply satisfying victory. The village's opinion of her shifted overnight. Those who had once believed her lies now turned away, embarrassed by their own complicity. One by one, the slanderous posters disappeared, torn down by Annette's own hand under the watchful eyes of the authorities. And Michael? He stood in his garden, watching as she erased the damage she had done. A quiet satisfaction settled in his chest. Though the scars of her campaign remained, his home, his peace had been reclaimed. Annette had tried to isolate him. Instead, she had only made his true neighbors rally around him. As the sun set, Michael raised a glass to his garden, his village, and the life he had fought to protect. "This is my home," he murmured, a small smile playing on his lips. And for the first time in weeks, he felt unshakable.